Me and my brother saw something on this day that neither of us can explain, but it sure left both of us quite spooked, and we haven't gone back to this spot on the creek since this day. Usually, it's our brotherly ritual to go fishing together every June. We blot out a couple of weekends together on the calendar and make it our thing to go to one of our favorite creeks, all along in different spots, and spend the entire day fishing, having a good time. I think it's more of an excuse to spend time together than it is to really catch anything. Although we've caught some great salmon. The biggest I've ever caught, actually. This day, it was closer to the beginning of summer, the summer solstice. I remember. It was a clear, beautiful day. The birds chirping. Everything was alive. The sky was clear and the sun was bright. It was going to be a fantastic day. It was probably around noon or 1. It was beginning to get really muggy. And I remember mentioning to my brother, we should probably try and find a more shaded spot. So we picked up our stuff, and we moved maybe a couple 100 yards down the creek, where it's more shaded, heavily forested by the oak trees. Once we spend about 10 minutes getting to this new spot, and getting situated, we get ready to cast our lines into the water. But that's when we hear the sound of an animal coming towards us. My brother and I both stop and look in the direction of what's coming. We think it might be a big male buck. Judging by the size and how loud it sounds, it wasn't trying at all to be quiet, making its way to the tree line. But because it was June, the brush was very thick, and we couldn't exactly see what it was approaching. My brother and I remained there quiet, standing still. We didn't want to spook this deer, or what we thought was a deer, and in that moment, it pokes its head out, followed by its body, in probably a half-second delay. What we were staring at was not a deer at all, but this canine-looking animal. It had a very huge head, and the most terrifying part of all is that it had these ominous glowing amber eyes and large fangs, kind of like a saber-toothed cat does, hanging down from its muzzle. It was walking on 4 legs at the time, but was easily the largest canine I've ever seen. My brother and I were frozen, not in total fear yet, but more so shock at what we were seeing. I've heard and read fantasy books before, and in that moment I was convinced we were looking at a real-life direwolf. The second it steps out into the open, we're probably no more than 40 feet away. It realizes we're there instantly, locks eyes with me and my brother, darting back and forth between us, and in one motion, stands up on its back hind legs. When it did this, it was incredibly tall, and even pumped out its chest, like it was taunting us to come and make a move. And I swear to you, it even had a slight smirk on its face, kind of like an expression that would read, "Yeah, right, you guys are no match for me." It was far too human in intelligence than it was animal. And I think that's one of the things that was very scary. As it did this, me and my brother lost all basic common sense of the woods, like never running away from a large predator. And we both took off running. Our legs just went without us, and we took off, going far down the creek from where we came and back down the trail from where our vehicle was, leaving everything behind. Our equipment, our fishing rods, lures, everything. This animal never gave chase, although it could have easily caught up to us if it wanted to, judging by how muscular it was, how lean and in shape it was, and how incredibly large it was. If the big bad wolf from Little Red Riding Hood was real, this was it. Now, let's talk a little bit about the description of this creature, since it was a clear day, and my brother and I got a really good look at it, which we would later recount to each other exactly what the other saw, and our details match up exactly. So we know we're not crazy. We know we didn't just hallucinate it or make it up. My brother and I firmly believe that if this thing wanted to, it could have torn us shred to shred. But it didn't. It's like it knew, judging by its expression and body language. We were clearly no match for it, which would make sense why it taunted us and wanted us to make the next move. Maybe we disappointed it. Its face and upper chest looked just like a large gray wolf, except the head was much larger, and its face was a little bit different. I don't know how to put it into words, but it just looked much meaner, with much larger fangs. The ears were also sharper and more pointed, and it was a little more smoky in color than your typical gray wolf, and we're not sure why it had that glow to its eyes, but it did. It was a very faint glow, kind of like when you have candles behind something. They kind of just give off this warm glow. That's what this was like too. One of the things that my brother and I both noted of is just how muscular this thing was, like it was going to the gym frequently. I mean, when it pumped out its chest, you could really see its biceps, even under the fur, which was not as thick as a regular wolf's fur. It was much thinner. Its arms and upper body seemed to be much larger in proportion to its lower body. It's kind of like its chest down to its butt, tapered down, and its legs, although muscular, were just like that of a dog's, which is why it looked so silly once it stood up. But it didn't appear to have any balancing issues, like at all. The last thing I wanted to point out was its hands. It did not have hands like a person, or like what you'd expect with any other canine creature. Paws. Its hands looked more like raccoon hands. It had a visible opposable thumb, and 4 fingers, with a small black claw at the end of each. It didn't really move them, though, during our encounter. It stayed pretty still, except the puffing out of its chest. Besides all that, though, that was more than enough that I ever wanted to see of this animal. My brother and I have since not returned to that exact fishing spot. Although we have returned to that river, it's just we try and stay far away from that little spot, covered by the heavy shade and trees. We prefer more open areas. They feel much safer. There's no predicting what that animal was capable of, and we'd never seen or heard anything like it since that day. Just wanted to give you a quick shout out and say that I love your channel, the stories you tell, and what you're doing. I believe that what you're doing is really helping many of us come to terms with what it is we saw, and for that, I thank you. You see, I have a sighting all of my own. I kind of live high up in the mountains. To get anywhere, you have to drive down this long 35-mile mountain road. It's pretty windy, very rocky, with loose woods all around. It's very scenic, but can also be very deadly if you're not paying attention. The road is not very big. It used to be an old logging road, and has since been roughly converted to a paved road, with minimal guard railing. So, again, in wintertime, you really need to be paying attention. As you're driving, though, looking out all around you is beautiful flat sloped land leading down the side of the mountain, which leads us right to our sighting. It's really no surprise that around here, I see a ton of white-tailed deer. They're everywhere. At least the does are. Then, come hunting season, the males start rutting, and the bucks will show up. But mainly, it's just a ton of doe. So when I see them off in the distance, I don't even bat an eye. I'm so used to seeing them. But when I looked over and saw this shape pursuing a deer, I was pretty confused at what I was looking at. And as I slowed the car down and began gawking at this animal pursuing this doe, it's clear to me that this was the largest wolf I had ever seen in my life. This thing kind of resembled more of a lion than it did a canine. It had a massive black hairy mane all around its head, and its entire color was jet black. Very tall cropped pointed ears, and a very long muzzle. It seemed really focused and driven on catching this runaway doe, but it happened so fast that I never saw the outcome of the chase. They just appeared between a small grouping of trees, off into the next, only briefly being out in the open. I'll admit that I've never seen an animal quite like this one. So, after some time had passed, I decided to try and dig a little deeper, find out what exactly this was. Everything points in the direction of something called a Dogman, something that sounds incredibly fictional and something out of folklore. But having seen this animal myself, and every description matches what I saw, I guess I'm left with no choice but to believe. What is your opinion on this? This happened when I was in high school. I was staying up late one night, probably working on math homework or something that I hated. Because this was near the end of the school year, I had my window open at night, and it was probably closer to midnight, since in high school I used to stay up to all the late morning hours. It was a hot day, that much I do remember, and I hadn't gotten an air conditioner yet for my room. So my ritual was I would goof off and procrastinate all evening, and then finally, about 10 or 11, open my window, let a cool breeze come in, and relax, put some music on, and do some homework. This night was not any different than any other night, except for what would occur. So I'm at my desk, lost in studying or doing homework, and I notice that there's a light blockage coming from the direction of my window. Where my desk is directly up against the wall. To my left is the bedroom window in question. To my right is a wall, and behind me is the bedroom door, because the window to my bedroom is all the way open and the blinds are open. There's a near full moon pouring into my room, illuminating my room even more than the small desk lamp that I had on. Because of this creature that stepped in front of my window blocked all light from coming in. And that's how I knew something was standing there. As soon as something blocked the light, I turned to see what it was, thinking somebody was outside my window. And when I turned, I just see this large black body, and my eyes literally follow up to the head. And while the face and all the features are dark, I see these fierce-looking dog eyes staring at me. They were glowing, kind of like a yellow golden glow, and as soon as I make eye contact with these eyes, I see the mouth begin to frown, and slowly the lips recede back and reveal a mouth full of these crazy teeth I could have never imagined seeing on whatever it was I was looking at. And along with that came this deep-toned guttural growl that sounded very angry. His expression on his face was that of, "I hate you, and I'm going to kill you if I get the chance." The only thing separating me from this thing was a small screen in my window, since the window was wide open. After staring at me for maybe 5 seconds, but it felt like forever, and here I am at my desk, completely petrified, frozen in place like a statue. I see this thing look down, reach its hand, as if to try and go through my window, and realize there's a screen there. As soon as it touches it, it looks back up at me, smirks, looks back down, and shoves its entire hand through the screen, like a person would if they were punching a hole through a sheet of paper. Completely effortless. Now, I'll say that punching a hole in a screen isn't a huge or impressive feat, but the fact that it did this with the intention of getting into my room to do whatever it wanted to me, that's what scares me. As soon as he did this, or it did this, I just jumped up, ran out of my room, and ran down the hallway to my parents' room. Hyperventilating, and on the verge of passing out, I explained to my parents there's somebody outside my window trying to break in. My dad, in a panic, jumps up, grabs his 12-gauge, cocks it, and goes down to my room, where he busts the door open and looks inside, points it right at the window. Nobody's there, but what's left in place is a large gaping hole in my screen that looked like something had punched a hole on the outside in, and this awful stench was lingering. It smelled like rotting meat and wet dog, really, really bad. I must have not smelt it in the moment, probably due to being frozen in fear, but something or someone was there. My dad, being incredibly concerned, phoned the police, and we had somebody come out, take a statement. But after looking around, there wasn't much they can do. No traces, no tracks, no evidence of who was here, why, or where they went. My dad, being such a great dad, stayed up with me the rest of that night, and we slept in the living room together. He kept the shotgun nearby in case this person tried to come back to break in. I didn't tell him or my mom what it was that I saw. I just said there was a person that was trying to break in my room, and so they were probably expecting some intruder or robber to come back. The very next day, my father replaces the screen in the window, and from now on, We both agree. Keep the window closed, keep the blinds shut at all times. We don't want to be giving an open invitation to anybody who wants to come in. And for a good week or two after that incident, I was very nervous alone at night, expecting this thing to come back, not to include all the nightmares that thing gave me. It looked terrible, if that gives you any idea of what I saw. It looked like a monster out of a horror movie or something. It really scared me for a long time. My location isn't anything special. I live in a pretty big, expansive neighborhood, north of Cincinnati. I was in one of the last houses in a cul-de-sac, so there were neighbors all around. We did not have much of a backyard, but nowhere I could see this thing hiding at. Even just taking the time to write this out, it brings back really bad memories. Memories I would prefer stay suppressed, but I guess this is probably helpful. Okay, first off, long-time listener. So, you would think somebody like me would know all the warning signs when there's a Dogman in the area. Well, even though I've been an avid listener for your entire channel's life, and I know a lot about Dogman, learning everything I know from Dogman Encounters, your show, and just my love and fascination with cryptids, I've never actually fully believed that they're a real entity. Until probably the last month. I live in a pretty small rural community, and within the last 2 weeks, all of our animals have completely disappeared. On top of that, much of the wildlife has kind of gone quiet too. I usually have a family of skunks that I feed at the backside of my property by the barn. They haven't been there for the last week, and I've been leaving food out. A lot of times too, I'll see coyotes running around, but haven't seen them either. Not a lot of deer either, which is usually rare. There's always deer in these parts. Now, what I'm not saying is that there is indeed a Dogman in the area, but it definitely is a strange coincidence, considering a lot of the encounters I heard off your show all talk about a Dogman being in the area and people's pets gone missing. Just about everybody I know, since I'm close with most of my neighbors, all their pets have vanished. Dogs, cats, no traces of them anywhere. Not even a body. Nothing. There's missing signs all over, and there's just far too many cats and dogs that have gone missing suddenly for anybody to write it off as a coyote, or that any of them have been hit or run over by a car. It just doesn't make sense. Maybe they've all been abducted. I don't know. What I'm terrified about is if there is a Dogman in the area, I'm sure there's more than just one, because I don't think they work alone. They're not lone wolves, they're pack animals, and who knows what they'll go after next. Hopefully not people, because if people start disappearing, then we're really going to have a large issue on our hands that only us residents can deal with. I'm not too worried about my safety. I'm heavily armed, and am ready if I have to defend my fortress or my life. I'll meet this Dogman with lead bullets, but it doesn't mean the anticipation of not knowing is killing me.